In the scorching desert lands of ancient Moab, tension hung heavy in the air like dust before a storm. King Balak, ruler of this arid kingdom, stood atop his palace balcony, his eyes tracing the horizon where a seemingly endless sea of tents stretched across the plains. Families gathered around flickering campfires, children laughed and played, and elders shared stories beneath the starlit sky. To any ordinary observer, it might have seemed like a simple, peaceful encampment. But to Balak, it was nothing short of a nightmare. The Israelites had emerged from Egypt, their numbers vast and their reputation formidable. Wherever they went, kingdoms fell before them not by sword alone, but by the presence of a God who fought on their behalf. Balak's heart pounded as he imagined his armies confronting these people. Spears and shields, walls and fortresses, none of it seemed capable of halting a force guided by divine protection. Fear gripped him, and in that fear, desperation took root. He knew he needed something beyond mere weapons, something intangible yet immensely powerful. In the ancient world, words carried weight as sharp and decisive as any sword. A spoken curse could sway the fate of nations. And there was one man whose words were said to shape destinies. Balaam, renowned across borders and kingdoms. Balaam was no ordinary seer. His blessings brought prosperity. His curses, ruin. Kings feared him. Nations respected him. And now, Balak believed that if anyone could halt Israel's unstoppable march, it was Balaam. Messengers were dispatched across valleys and rivers, carrying with them promises of silver, gold, and honor, as well as the king's fervent plea. Their mission was clear: bring Balaam to Moab, and through his words, turn the tide against Israel. But even as the envoys rode through dusty trails, unaware of the divine currents at play, the first hints of irony shimmered in the desert air. For while Balak feared Israel's numbers, he underestimated the power of the God who protected them. No gold, no altar, no human scheme could undo what had been divinely ordained. Imagine standing on that balcony with the wind whipping through your hair, a kingdom behind you, and an army of faith-driven people ahead. What would you do? Would you trust in your own might, or would you seek a higher power, a voice capable of swaying fate itself? Balak chose the latter, but in doing so, he stepped into a story that would forever reveal the limits of human ambition and the unshakable sovereignty of divine will. Before we journey further into Balaam's incredible story, a prophet, a king, and yes, a donkey that would speak wisdom beyond its years, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of this astonishing tale where courage, temptation, and divine intervention collide in ways that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about fate, obedience, and the power of words. This is just the beginning of a story that stretches across deserts, kingdoms, and centuries, ultimately pointing to a prophecy that echoes far beyond Moab, a tale where the smallest voices can carry the greatest truths. Keep watching, because what happens next is both shocking and unforgettable. As the sun dipped behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the quiet land, Balaam sat in the modest comfort of his home, a place far removed from the opulence of Moab's palaces. Though unassuming in appearance, his reputation reached far and wide, whispered in royal courts and among common folk alike. People spoke of him with a mixture of awe and fear, for the words he uttered were said to carry the power of life and death, prosperity and ruin. Kings had sought his counsel, princes had approached him with lavish gifts, and nations had waited anxiously for his blessings or his cursing words. Yet Balaam was a man whose true allegiance was not to wealth, fame, or human authority, but to a higher voice that had long guided his life. It was in this quiet stillness that the first of Balak's messengers arrived. their robes dust-streaked and their faces bearing the weight of their king's anxiety. They knelt before him, hands clasped in supplication, and spoke the words they had rehearsed countless times on the journey. O great prophet, a people has come from Egypt, vast in number, spreading across the land like waves upon the shore. Our king implores you to curse them for us, for they are too mighty to oppose, and without your words, our armies cannot stand. Silver, gold, and honor shall be yours beyond measure if you heed this call. Balaam regarded them carefully, his gaze steady yet thoughtful, aware of the ambition hidden behind their flattery. The offer was immense, more than most men could ever imagine, yet something deeper stirred within him. Though the allure of wealth and influence pressed against his heart like the desert heat, he had long learned that no material reward could ever replace obedience to the voice of the divine. He paused, allowing the murmurs of the wind and the distant song of birds to remind him of a truth that had guided his steps for years. Israel was untouchable because of God's blessing, a covenant that no human hand could overturn. That night, as darkness settled like a velvet curtain over the land and the first stars began to pierce the sky, Balaam knelt in prayer. His voice, steady yet reverent, carried across the quiet room. Lord, he whispered, messengers have come with gifts and pleas. They ask me to curse a people whose strength and presence threaten the lands of Moab. What should I do? The silence that followed was profound, yet it was filled with clarity and authority. There was no hesitation, no ambiguity. The answer came with the weight of certainty. You shall not go with them. You shall not curse this people, for they are blessed. Morning broke with a gentle glow, and Balaam rose to meet the messengers once more. Their expressions, lined with exhaustion and anticipation, waited for a response that could alter the course of history. Balaam's words were measured, precise, and unwavering. Return to your land, he said, his tone calm but firm, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you. The messengers' faces fell, their hope dimming as they absorbed the weight of his refusal. In that moment, the first of many lessons unfolded quietly but unmistakably. No treasure, no promise of honor, no fear of enemies could ever override the sovereign will that guided Balaam's life. Yet beneath the surface of his obedience, the human heart is rarely simple. Though he spoke with clarity and integrity, Balaam was not without ambition. The king's entreaties lingered in his thoughts, whispered at the edges of his conscience, tempting him to imagine what might be gained if he could somehow walk the fine line between obedience and personal desire. When Balak heard of the prophet's refusal, his frustration ignited a deeper determination. He reasoned that perhaps the first offer had been insufficient, and so he would send even greater emissaries, adorned with richer promises and higher status, to sway the prophet's decision. The second delegation arrived, more imposing than the first, their garments richly woven, their words polished and persuasive. Balaam listened, his heart caught in the quiet tension between reverence and temptation. Even as he acknowledged the gifts and honors presented, he did not waver in his outward response. Even if Balak gave me his house full of silver and gold, he replied, I could not do anything beyond the command of the Lord my God. The words were righteous, yet the spark of longing that flickered in his chest revealed the delicate balance of human desire against divine obedience. That night, the divine voice came again, granting permission in a way that tested Balaam's intentions rather than simply changing them. Rise and go with them, the message declared, but only the word that I speak to you, that you shall do. What seemed like liberty was, in truth, a mirror held up to his heart, revealing the fragile line between outward compliance and inward surrender. Balaam prepared to set out at dawn, imagining the honors awaiting him. unaware that each step carried both permission and a subtle warning. The road before him would not merely lead to Moab. It would confront the hidden motives of his own heart and reveal that true obedience is measured not in action alone, but in the purity of intent. Thus, Balaam's initial refusal and the divine counsel that guided it became the opening act of a story that intertwined ambition, fear, and revelation, showing that even the most renowned prophet could not escape the necessity of aligning his heart fully with the will that governs all destiny. The stage was set, not just for a journey across deserts, but for a profound lesson in the cost of divided intentions and the unassailable power of divine blessing. The first rays of dawn stretched across the horizon, casting a pale gold glow over Balaam's modest dwelling as he prepared for a journey that would test not only his faith, but the very intentions of his heart. The night had been long with contemplation and prayer, filled with a quiet tension between obedience and ambition. Though he had spoken with certainty to the first messengers, refusing the king's request, the weight of Balak's offers still lingered in his mind like a distant echo, soft yet persistent, tempting him to imagine what might be gained if he could somehow navigate the narrow path between divine command and human desire. Wealth beyond imagination, honor among kings, the adulation of nations, all of it glittered in his thoughts. And though he knew that no mortal treasure could surpass the authority of God, the allure of recognition and influence pressed against the boundaries of his resolve. When the second delegation arrived, adorned in the richest garments and bearing gifts more lavish than the first, Balaam could not ignore the subtle pull of ambition that stirred within him. Their words, polished and insistent, carried not only promises of gold and silver, but also the implicit suggestion that he could, through skill and discretion, shape the course of nations to his own advantage. Great prophet, they implored, their voices tinged with both reverence and expectation. Do not refuse the request of our king. Come with us, and whatever you say shall be done. Honor, position, and wealth shall all be yours if only you act in this matter. The temptation was palpable, a siren call that tugged at the edges of his heart, even as he remembered the solemnity of his covenant with the divine. He paused, aware of the flicker of desire that had crept into his thoughts, and yet outwardly he responded with measured caution, acknowledging the gifts and entreaties while reaffirming his commitment to the one whose word alone carried true authority. Even if Balak gave me his house full of silver and gold, he replied, I could not do anything beyond the command of the Lord my God. That night, as the desert wind whispered through the trees and the stars shimmered in the sky like scattered jewels, Balaam knelt once more, seeking clarity and direction. In the stillness of the night, a divine voice broke the silence, granting him permission to accompany the messengers, but with a condition that revealed more than it concealed. Rise and go with them, the message said, but only the word that I speak to you, that you shall do. It was a permission that carried both freedom and restraint, an allowance that tested the integrity of his intentions. The instruction was simple yet profound. He could journey with the king's envoys. He could face the Israelites and witness their encampment. But not a single word of curse could pass his lips unless it was first shaped and sanctioned by the divine voice. This duality, this mixture of permission and limitation, exposed the hidden recesses of Balaam's heart. Though he had spoken obedience in the daylight before men, the night revealed the subtle ambition that still lingered, a longing for recognition, for honor, for the tangible reward that the world could offer, even as he professed loyalty to the unseen authority that guided him. The next morning, as the sun rose over the quiet land and cast long shadows across the desert paths, Balaam mounted his donkey, preparing to leave for Moab. To the messengers, his readiness appeared as a confident affirmation, a sign that the prophet would fulfill their king's wishes. Yet beneath the surface of his outward composure, a quiet internal struggle raged. The journey ahead would be more than a physical passage through valleys and hills. It would be a test of discernment, a confrontation with his own divided motives, and a lesson in the delicate balance between ambition and obedience. Each step of the donkey echoed the tension within him, the rhythmic sound of hooves a metronome marking the slow passage of contemplation and temptation. The road itself became a stage upon which the true measure of Balaam's heart would be revealed. As he traveled, he imagined the splendor that awaited him, the favor he might gain, the influence he could wield if he managed to navigate the path with skill and subtlety. Yet in that same journey, every thought, every decision, carried the invisible weight of divine oversight, a reminder that outward compliance alone was insufficient. True obedience required alignment of intent, the surrender of ambition to the authority that surpasses human desire. The allowance to go, though seemingly a concession, was in reality a mirror held to his inner motives, exposing where his heart leaned and revealing the fragile line between human desire and divine command. In this moment, the story of Balaam becomes a timeless reflection on the human condition, the tension between what we wish for and what we are called to, the struggle to maintain integrity in the face of temptation, and the subtle ways in which ambition can color even the noblest actions. The permission granted by God was not a waiver of authority but a test, an opportunity to reveal the depth of his heart, and a reminder that even the most renowned prophet could not escape the scrutiny of a power far greater than any earthly king. The journey ahead, though outwardly a simple passage to Moab, was in truth the beginning of a profound confrontation between ambition and obedience, human desire and divine will, the seen and the unseen that would define not only Balaam's path, but the unfolding of events that would echo far beyond his own lifetime, shaping the destiny of nations and illuminating the enduring truth that the integrity of the heart cannot be bypassed, even by the most powerful or the most clever of men. The sun had barely begun its ascent when Balaam set out from his dwelling, his mind alive with both anticipation and a subtle unease that he could not yet name. The path ahead stretched through valleys and rocky hills, and though the messengers rode confidently beside him, a tension hovered in the air, invisible yet palpable, as if the very earth beneath them was aware of the drama unfolding. Balaam's heart carried a mixture of resolve and ambition, a duality that God had already discerned, and that would soon be exposed in a way that none could have predicted. He guided his donkey along the winding road, imagining the honors that awaited him in Moab, the grandeur of recognition, and the gleaming gold and silver promised by a king who feared the power of Israel. Yet, as his mind wandered through visions of reward and influence, he remained oblivious to a presence that stood directly in his path, a presence unseen but fully aware of the intentions harbored in his heart. It was here, in the stillness of the early morning, that the divine paradox revealed itself. An angel of the Lord, sword drawn and face stern with the authority of heaven, stood like an immovable sentinel upon the narrow road. Balaam, whose reputation was that of a seer whose eyes could discern the movements of the spiritual realm, saw nothing. His vision, clouded by ambition and the lure of reward, failed him at the most critical moment. Yet the donkey, humble and long accustomed to the guidance of its rider, perceived the invisible barrier with perfect clarity. Twice it veered and resisted, first into an open field and then against the walls of a vineyard, pressing against Balaam in ways that caused him confusion and frustration, each motion interpreted by the prophet as mere stubbornness. And twice Balaam, blind to the truth before him, struck the animal with his staff, his voice tinged with indignation, his actions driven by the assumption that his authority as rider justified his anger. The irony was profound. The prophet, a man celebrated for spiritual insight and the ability to shape destinies with words, was blind to the divine reality that his humble companion recognized without hesitation. By the third encounter, The situation reached a point of undeniable confrontation. The road narrowed to the tightest passage, and the angel stood, unyielding, sword raised, a symbol of both judgment and mercy. The donkey, trembling, lay down beneath Balaam in a gesture of defiance that was at once protective and accusatory, refusing to proceed along a path that would bring the prophet to harm. Balaam, consumed by a mixture of rage and embarrassment, struck the animal a third time, failing to perceive the hand of God orchestrating each moment. It was then that the miraculous occurred. The Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and in a voice clear enough to penetrate Balaam's clouded perception, it spoke, questioning the repeated strikes and pointing to the peril in which its rider now stood. The words, though coming from a creature long considered merely a beast of burden, cut through the fog of Balaam's ambition and pride, exposing the divided state of his heart, a heart caught between the obedience he professed and the desires he nurtured in secret. Startled beyond reason, Balaam responded with anger, declaring that he would kill the animal if he had a sword in hand. Yet the donkey, with simple logic and the honesty of one untainted by pride, reminded him of the loyalty and service it had faithfully provided throughout the years. It was at this moment, in the collision of human arrogance and humble insight, that God opened Balaam's eyes. He saw, for the first time, the angel standing in the road, sword gleaming, a divine sentinel whose presence had been interpreted by the donkey with perfect discernment. Fear surged through him, washing away the remnants of arrogance and leaving a raw awareness of how close he had come to destruction. The angel spoke with authority, explaining that the prophetess' path had been perverse in the sight of the Lord, and that the mercy extended through the donkey had prevented a fatal outcome. Balaam, humbled and shaken, confessed his sin and recognized the divine correction, the invisible yet unyielding measure of God's authority that had been revealed through a voice he had long dismissed. In the quiet aftermath, as Balaam rose to continue the journey, a transformation had begun, subtle yet profound. His heart, once divided, now bore the indelible mark of confrontation with divine truth. The donkey, an instrument of correction, and the angel, a manifestation of heavenly oversight, had together illuminated the danger of ambition unchecked by obedience. The lesson was clear. Even the most renowned prophet could not escape scrutiny, and even the most ordinary creature could become an agent of divine revelation. Each step along the road to Moab was now measured not only by the physical terrain, but by the newfound awareness of responsibility, integrity, and the need for alignment between desire and divine will. The journey, though outwardly appearing to be a path of honor and opportunity, had become a crucible in which Balaam's understanding of obedience, mercy, and discernment would be forged, teaching that no measure of human ambition could circumvent the scrutiny of a higher power, and that the humility to perceive truth even when it comes from the least expected source is the foundation of wisdom and survival. Balaam's journey to Moab had been marked by divine confrontation, humble correction, and the revelation of a heart divided between obedience and ambition. And yet, as he arrived on the hills overlooking the vast encampments of Israel, a new tension arose that would test both his courage and the immutability of God's word. King Balak, restless and consumed with the desire to see Israel cursed, had prepared altars and sacrifices, 7 in number, each offering more sumptuous than the last, believing that ritual and wealth could sway the outcome in his favor. From his elevated vantage point, Balak watched the sprawling white tents glimmering like waves of silver in the morning sun, a sight that stirred both awe and frustration within him. For while he sought destruction, he was confronted with the living testament of God's protection and blessing over a people he could neither intimidate nor overcome. The air seemed charged with anticipation as Balaam, now humbled by the lessons learned on the road, the mercy of a donkey, the authority of an angel, and the weight of divine oversight, prepared to speak, seeking once more to align his words with the command he had been given, a command that was unyielding and sovereign. As he ascended the heights, Balaam's heart wrestled with the memory of the temptations that had accompanied the journey, the promises of wealth, the allure of honor, the imagined recognition that had initially clouded his judgment, and he realized that all human incentives paled in comparison to the authority of God's word, which neither gold nor power could alter. When Balak demanded the curse, his voice trembling with expectation and barely contained impatience, Balaam turned to seek the Lord, not for permission or approval but for clarity. For he now understood that the outcome depended not on human desire but on divine decree. The silence that followed was profound, a silence that stretched across the hills, encompassing the tents below and the tension above, a silence that signified the anticipation of a moment in which heaven itself would speak. When Balaam returned his gaze to Balak, the prophet's lips carried words that rang not with the sound of a human voice alone, but with the authority and weight of divine blessing, a sound that would echo across valleys, shake the expectations of kings, and reverberate through history. From Aram Balak has brought me. Balaam began, his voice steady yet commanding, to curse Jacob and denounce Israel. Yet how shall I curse whom God has not cursed? How shall I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? The words struck with the force of undeniable truth, cutting through the tension that had gripped Balak and his courtiers, revealing the futility of human schemes in the face of divine sovereignty. Balaam's eyes scanned the valley, observing the tents, the families, the children playing, and the elders sharing stories beneath the open sky. And in his words, the very essence of God's blessing was declared, a people set apart, protected, and endowed with strength that no king, army, or incantation could diminish. Balak, consumed with frustration, could scarcely believe what he was hearing. He had summoned a renowned prophet, offered riches and honor beyond measure, and yet the outcome was the opposite of his desire. A reversal that exposed both the limits of his power and the certainty of God's will. Balaam's pronouncement continued, painting a vivid picture of Israel's destiny, a vision that spoke of dwellings spread like valleys and gardens by the river, of abundance and prosperity, of kingship and strength that would rise above all opposition. Each word reinforced a singular truth: the blessing of God is irrevocable, rooted not in human ambition, ritual, or persuasion, but in the eternal character of the Creator, a force that no scheme could overturn. Balak's insistence grew desperate, his offerings more elaborate, his commands more insistent. Yet with every attempt, Balaam's words remained steadfast, a reflection not of the prophet's own power but of the unshakable sovereignty of God, whose blessings are neither bought nor bent by the desires of mortals. The tension between human intent and divine will became palpable, a lesson rendered in real time on the hills of Moab. No wealth could purchase favor against the decree of heaven. No altar could compel what God had already determined, and no human authority could reverse what was ordained. As Balaam spoke, the irony of the moment was striking. A prophet once tempted by riches now became the vessel through which God's immutable blessing was declared. A blessing that nullified the fears and plans of a king who had sought to manipulate destiny. The words of blessing flowed naturally, yet carried the weight of divine certainty, each phrase a testament to the enduring truth that God's intentions for his people surpass human comprehension and cannot be thwarted by force or persuasion. The hills echoed with the resonance of divine authority, the white tents below shimmering as a visible reminder of the invisible power protecting Israel, a testament to a covenant that neither fear, gold, nor human machinations could alter. Balak, witnessing the effect of the prophet's declaration, felt a deep frustration, for in his effort to destroy he had only revealed the futility of resisting the sovereign will, The repeated blessings Balaam spoke were not mere words. They were the unfolding of a reality that human ambition could neither anticipate nor control. A reality that demonstrated in the clearest terms that God's blessing endures beyond all opposition and human desire. By the time Balaam concluded, the lesson was unmistakable. The covenant and blessing of God are not subject to negotiation, manipulation, or human ambition. What Balak had sought through power, wealth, and coercion had been transformed into a witness to God's sovereignty. A living demonstration that divine will operates on a plane far beyond mortal influence. Balaam, once tempted and divided, now stood as a conduit of that unbreakable decree, his words flowing from obedience rather than desire, from recognition of authority rather than pursuit of personal gain, and from alignment with eternal truth rather than temporal ambition. The king of Moab, despite his wealth, preparation, and persistence, could do nothing but witness the impossibility of overturning what God had ordained. A humbling acknowledgement that human schemes are ultimately powerless before the enduring blessing of the Creator. In that moment, on the hills overlooking Israel, the profound reality was made manifest. Divine blessing is sovereign, irrevocable, and impervious to the manipulations of men. A timeless lesson carried forward through the ages and through the voice of a prophet who had learned, at last, to speak only what the Lord commanded. As Balaam stood once more on the heights overlooking the Israelite camp, the weight of the moment pressed upon him in a way that was both humbling and awe-inspiring. He had already witnessed the futility of human ambition, the mercy of God revealed even through the unexpected voice of a donkey, and the undeniable sovereignty of the divine blessing that no king or scheme could overturn. Yet, even after 3 separate pronouncements of blessing, a final revelation awaited, one that would stretch far beyond the hills of Moab, beyond the nations surrounding Israel, and ultimately point toward a future unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Spirit of God moved upon Balaam, filling him with clarity and vision, lifting the veil of time and allowing him to glimpse a destiny yet to unfold. A promise that would echo through generations and resound in the hearts of all who sought the truth. With eyes opened by divine insight and heart humbled by the lessons of the journey, Balaam lifted his voice to speak, and what he proclaimed was no ordinary oracle. It was a vision of the Messiah, the long-awaited king who would rise from Jacob and rule with righteousness, whose dominion would be eternal and unshakable. See, but now, Balaam declared, I behold it, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab and break down all the sons of Sheth. The words resonated with authority, not because of Balaam's own power, but because they were infused with the eternal truth of God's plan. A plan that no human could alter and no ambition could circumvent. The prophecy revealed the coming of a ruler whose kingdom would not be bought with gold, nor threatened by armies, whose reign would surpass the schemes of kings and the pride of nations. Balaam, once tempted and divided, now spoke as a vessel of truth, a messenger whose words would carry far beyond his lifetime, pointing to the hope and salvation that God had ordained for the world. As he continued, Balaam's vision painted a vivid and enduring picture of God's providence. The star and scepter were not merely symbols. They were divine instruments demonstrating that God's purposes are deliberate, eternal, and unstoppable. Every detail, from the rise of a king from among the people of Jacob to the defeat of Israel's enemies, emphasized that God's plans cannot be thwarted by human desire, fear, or manipulation. Balaam's words carried a solemn reminder that blessing and judgment alike flow from God's eternal will, and that obedience, not ambition, aligns the human heart with this unshakable truth. In that moment, the prophet's voice became a bridge between the earthly and the divine, reminding Balak and all who heard of the futility of resisting what God has ordained, and the necessity of surrendering one's desires to the authority of heaven. For Israel, these words were more than prophecy. They were protection and assurance, a confirmation that their God had set them apart and that no curse, no scheme, and no human power could overturn the blessing spoken over them. For Balak, the frustrated king of Moab, Balaam's final oracle was a stark and humbling revelation. The riches, altars, and persistence of man are powerless against the eternal decree of God. Every attempt to manipulate the prophet, to bend the divine will to his desires, had failed, and in the process, the glory of God was magnified, the sovereignty of divine blessing was made unmistakable, and the futility of human schemes was exposed in the clearest terms. The story of Balaam serves as a mirror to humanity, a reminder that ambition unchecked by obedience, even when cloaked in piety or prestige, will fall short before God's eternal plan. But Balaam's final oracle was not only a lesson for kings and prophets. It was a message for every heart willing to listen, a timeless call to reflection and surrender. The prophecy of the star and the scepter pointed forward to Christ, the Messiah, the true King whose dominion cannot be shaken and whose blessing endures forever. It reminds us that the paths we take, the choices we make, and the hearts we cultivate matter profoundly, for God sees what is hidden, tests what is divided, and elevates what is surrendered. Balaam's experienced temptation, correction, obedience, and vision demonstrates the transformative power of aligning one's heart with God's will, showing that even those of great reputation or skill are not exempt from the lessons of humility and faith. As we reflect on this story today, let us take to heart the enduring truth it conveys. Blessings that come from God cannot be reversed by fear, wealth, or manipulation. Human schemes will always fall short before the divine plan. And obedience, guided by a surrendered heart, is the pathway to participating in God's unshakable purposes. Balaam's voice, once tempted by greed and ambition, ultimately declared a prophecy that transcended nations and centuries, pointing to the coming of a king whose kingdom remains unshakable and eternal. Friend, if this story has inspired you, challenged you, or moved your heart, carry its lesson forward in your own life. Reflect on where your own ambitions may conflict with a higher purpose, and consider how surrender and obedience can align your path with what is truly eternal. Share this message with others who need hope, encouragement, and the reminder that God's plan cannot be thwarted. And if you want to continue exploring stories of faith, vision, and divine purpose, make sure to subscribe to this channel and join our community, where we seek truth, inspiration, and the wisdom that comes from looking beyond the ordinary. Because in the end, the story of Balaam is not just an ancient tale, it is a call to recognize that God's blessings endure. His word stands, and his, revealed through prophecy and fulfilled in Christ, is eternal.